They're going to be all right there. Can get rid of that anymore.
Yeah, they just looks good, so it should be. That's only behind.
There we go. Yeah, no, so thank you all for coming. So I'm Ellie and I work for Mossy Earth. So I'm just here today to tell you a little bit about what we do at Mossy Earth. And then, yeah, I'll kind of give you an overview. And then if anyone's got any questions about any specific elements of what we do, I've kind of just left it open to kind of for the conversation to be guided by whatever interest we've got in the room. So Mossy Earth itself was set up in 2017. It was set up as a ecosystem restoration company. It started out with a large focus on tree planting. And over the years, we've kind of gradually realized that kind of tree planting is probably one of the more well-funded types of restoration interventions. And so we've really tried to branch out into kind of more of the underfunded and neglected elements of our ecosystems. And yeah, a lot of what we do can also be referred to as rewilding. It's one of those confusing words that's got so many different connotations attached to it. So I just wanted to start by talking you through, we're going to change slides, there we go, what rewilding means to us at Mossy Earth. So fundamentally, rewilding for us is the restoration of healthy ecosystems. We take the approach of having a holistic focus on ecosystem functions and processes. So there's no one particular species or one particular ecosystem that we kind of prioritize. We're really trying to kickstart those fundamental processes that feed into resilience and kind of self-preservation of the ecosystem. Some people can interpret the word rewilding with a strong emphasis on the as in return to something from the past. But for us, we feel that rewilding should be forward-looking. So the world we live in now is incredibly different to the world we lived in 100 years ago in terms of people and communities and industry. So to try and return to what we had 100 years ago can create a lot of friction between people and nature. Which is the opposite of what we want. We want to be able to integrate people with nature. I think that's a really fundamental part of rewilding, which means we need to look forward to what the ecosystems can look like in today's area, and also looking forward in terms of how climate change might again impact that and change things. So we've got this really fantastic tool that we use that was developed by the Society for Ecological Restoration. And I think I just wanted to give a very brief overview of this to really help people understand what I mean when I say kind of holistic focus on rewilding. It's one of those buzzwords that can kind of be hard to dissect what it means, but I think it's called the recovery wheel, and it does it fantastically. So I won't go into the 18 segments in the middle. That could take me an hour in itself. But if we kind of use the 6 categories around the outside, as kind of talking points. So we've got species composition, which is probably the most quite commonly understood element of conservation and ecosystem restoration. So that's making sure you've got the right communities of plants and animals, and basically you don't have invasive species or kind of undesirable species in those ecosystems that are causing things to be out of balance. Obviously, this is a very important component, but it's just one slice of the rewilding pie. So then we've got structural diversity. So this is about having all of the different niches within the ecosystems. If you picture a forest, it's about not just having your canopy trees, but about having your shrub layer, having your understory, having your deadwood. That's all the different strata that you get that kind of species focused alone won't give you. Then we've got ecosystem function. So that's productivity and cycling, resilience and recruitment. So if we stick with the woodland, are you getting the next generation of trees naturally regenerating? Are you having the decomposition of all of your saprotrophic species to release the nutrients back into the system? If not, how can you kickstart those processes? Especially thinking about restoration, this can seem a long way off when you're trying to restore something from scratch, but already thinking about kind of at what stage can you perhaps introduce say deadwood into a younger woodland. It wouldn't naturally be producing deadwood if it's say only 10 or 15 years old, but actually already bringing that in can really start to kickstart providing the different niches within the ecosystem. You've then got external exchanges. So you might be restoring a woodland, but what's around your woodland? How are things going to get to your woodland? how are things going to move out to your woodland when your woodland is thriving and full of different species? Like if your woodland has kind of reached its absolute peak and it's full, it's carrying capacity, where are those species going to go? And how are you going to get new genetic diversity into that woodland? And then we've got the absence of threats. So it's no good restoring your woodland if you've still got invasive species or you've got pollution and things that aren't going to allow it to thrive. You're just going to be battling with the natural conditions that are there. So tackling those threats, that might be kind of more social interventions. It might be remediation rather than active restoration at that point in time, but that's an equally important element of what we address. And then lastly, we've got the physical conditions. So these can be things as simple as kind of making sure that the soil's got the right properties to actually be able to support a tree, and making sure that the water is clean and not polluted. So you can see that obviously all of these things tie together, but this is a fantastic tool to really be able to think about all of these different elements. And we can use this to rate, say, a patch or like a defined area. You can score all of these different elements within it at different points in time. So we try to do this once a year. We've basically done the baseline this year, so we're still kind of rolling it out. But it's a really nice way to track changes through time. And some things will go up, and the reality is some things will go down. You might get new invasive species that arrive, and actually the condition of that is going to decrease. But this gives you an overview of how things are doing as a whole. We've then got a really nice second component to this, which is a social benefits wheel. So this allows us to make sure that we're really thinking about how people are involved in restoration. So we've got communities, so making sure that they are gaining the benefits from this area, that it's not kind of closed off and removed from them, and all of the kind of mental health benefits that I'm sure we're all aware that that can bring. We've got stakeholder engagement. So much of project long-term success is tied to the stakeholders of the area, and that includes the local communities as well. They're just one of many stakeholders. So that's making sure that they will support this intervention in the long term, because ultimately many rewilding projects, you can only sustain your presence in one area for so long. At some point, it's going to have to pass into the hands of the local people and the local stakeholders. So making sure that they're involved and invested and appreciate that it will allow it to kind of self-perpetuate. So yeah, there's other elements on here in terms of sustainable economies. Ultimately, people need to make a living, right? And there's increasingly diverse ways of being able to make a living in harmony with nature. We've got the different credit systems coming in, for better or worse. They've all got their pros and cons, but it's kind of developing, and it's a very exciting area. Restoring natural capital, I guess that's similar, that overlaps with the economies, but kind of talks about it in its own sense. So carbon for the benefit of carbon, not necessarily for the economic benefit. And finally, knowledge enrichment, in terms of making sure that we're sharing everything that we're learning about, drawing upon traditional ecological knowledge as well, and innovating. Every new development we can make is only going to help speed things up. So with all of that in mind, I wanted to chat first about our Mossy Earth community. So we're defining community in this sense as those who are invested in or impacted by a project. So we're really looking for an all-encompassing definition here. Because of the way that Mossy Earth is funded, I'll go into this a bit more in the next slide, but we have members who fund our projects from over 30 different countries. So our community is so much bigger than just the local people, although the local people are, of course, a huge part of it. We've got over 60 projects at the moment, which are also spread across 17 different countries. So even if you just took the local people, we've still got a huge diversity of kind of cultures and interests that we try to incorporate into our projects. And then we've got our more online community. So YouTube is a huge part of what we do, in terms of transparency and kind of sharing knowledge and sharing the stories of our projects. There's nothing you can hide in a video. It's all about transparency and taking people on the journey of restoration. And we've also got a rewilding course for people that want to learn more about how to do these things. And we've tried to cater that to any scale. So from rewilding your own garden to setting up your own community projects. So there's so many different ways that people can become involved and become part of the rewilding community. So Mossy Earth itself is funded by our members. So we currently have around 14,500 members, and this works on a subscription service. So just like what you might have for Netflix or Amazon, people subscribe. It starts at £5 a month. Some people give more, some people give less. I think our average contribution does work out around £10 per month. And that's where we pull all of our funding in from. And from that funding, 80% goes to our kind of overheads, our staff costs, all of the kind of admin, finances and everything we need to do. And 80% goes purely onto the costs of the projects. So this is quite a tight margin for us to be working in terms of our overheads. But we think it's really important that as much money as possible goes into restoration. So with that support, we then take action to restore nature. The emphasis for our projects is always on evidence-based and cost-effective interventions. We want them to be socially responsible, and we've kind of found a bit of a niche over the years in funding more innovative projects. I'll talk more about a few of those later. But from these, we then have our transparent impact reporting. So anyone that's a member gets access to our kind of, I guess, our own members app and like online portal where they get custom updates. And we kind of chat on those updates in a closed group. There's also closed Discord groups and things like that. But more widely, we've obviously got social medias where we share a snapshot of what we're doing. YouTube probably being our most successful of those. I strongly encourage you to check out our videos if you haven't already seen them. They're very therapeutic watching. And obviously this just kind of feeds itself. As our reach on YouTube reaches more people, we get more members, we're able to do more projects, we're able to make more videos. And so the cycle continues. It's a really fantastic way of funding these projects. It gives us such flexibility to do such a range of different projects on different ecosystems. And yeah, I think it's really quite unique, although we are starting to see more funding models like this come through, which is also fantastic. So Mossy Earth started out, I guess, as like a grant funding organisation where we as our in-house biologists had slightly more involvement than your traditional grant setup. So these might be the projects that you're most familiar with if you've seen anything from us historically. So I just wanted to give you a snapshot of the different projects that we run. So the one on the left, or yeah, still left for you guys. We've got restoring wetlands. So that's in Slovakia. And that is along the River Danube. So the Danube has obviously got a big dam upriver. And this really restricts the water flow in the historic channel that used to be the Danube. They like remade and straightened the whole channel when they put in this dam. But the old channels are still there. They're just incredibly dry. And yeah, just weren't getting any water in. But those were the really important. They went into what's called like floodplain forests, which is where you get all the fish nurseries. So we worked very well. We partnered with a local organisation called BROS, and they worked very closely with the dam company to ensure that more water was being let through twice a year as a minimum, more if we get like extreme rains. And then we had to dig out some of these channels to actually put the gradient going the correct way for the water to refill them when the water comes through. So this has been a really successful project. The works there are largely completed, but we tend to go back every year and film some very beautiful footage of the floodplain forests. I've been kayaking through them and it is truly incredible. So that one's got a soft spot for us. It was one of our first videos that went viral on YouTube. And it brought in a lot of members for us. So yeah, that one's got a special place in our hearts at Mossy Earth. We've then got more traditional projects, I guess carnivore reintroductions. So this is in Argentina with Rewilding Argentina. And yeah, it does exactly what it says on the tin. I think we've released 5 different ocelots now. And yeah, we're still seeing how they're settling in. I think there might be a couple more still to be released on the project. Obviously, I don't manage all of these, so I've kind of got a broad overview of what's going on. We've then got 2 projects here in Scotland. So we've got Restoring Forest Fungi, which is a trial using mycorrhizal fungi applications on mountain birch, so high altitude birch planting, down with Borders Forest Trust at Taller and Gameshope. So I'm heading down there tomorrow to go and do the first measuring of the trees. But we've basically got treated trees and control trees that are planted without any fungi. And we're going to be measuring various metrics of growth and health. And we'll see if we can give some montane habitat a much needed boost in successful restoration. Then got temperate rainforest restoration. So this is at Loch Arcade with the community forest there. And this was actually removing Sicta spruce that's kind of left over from an old plantation to really allow the native Scots pine woods to bounce back and come through. Yeah, there's tons of these. Just a quick run through. So saving rare sea cliff plants is in Portugal. So again, that's dealing with an invasive species. It's called the ice plant to allow 2 endemic cliff plants to bounce back. We're working very closely with the local climbing community there. And that project's a lot of fun. You kind of get down on the ropes and abseil down and remove all of these different plants. So more work on the mountain birch, this time focusing on it in terms of actually getting the seed. So yeah, mountain birch seed is quite difficult to collect because there's so few remnants left. And it's very notoriously difficult to propagate in the nurseries. Like it just doesn't grow well because it's used to growing at high altitudes. And it doesn't seem to like growing in the nurseries at low altitudes. There's been some success actually growing it in like cold conditions, essentially putting it in a fridge to kind of mimic being at altitude. But that's a real blocker in restoration for mountain birch at the moment. We then got some snails. So these are 4 species of snails that are endemic to, they're called the desertus, so uninhabited islands, Portuguese islands near Madeira. And that's been a captive breeding program. So going to the islands on an expedition to collect these different snails, get enough of a population to captive breed them, and then we've literally just done the release back in November back onto the islands to kind of re-kickstart those populations, which is very exciting. And then yeah, we've got work in Iceland, bringing back the Icelandic birchwoods, which are, everyone's like, why are you planting trees in Iceland? Iceland doesn't have trees. But that's precisely the point. Iceland used to have somewhere between 25% and 40% land cover. Obviously, they needed all of those trees for fuel. But yeah, the lack of the trees has caused so much desertification over there. So yeah, we're really working to try and get those trees back. But that's a little snapshot and kind of really reinforces my point at the start of rewilding can be so diverse, and there's so many different aspects you can take. So after a few years of working with all of these different partnership projects, we really felt that we wanted to have more of a long-term investment in a couple of areas for ourselves. You've seen we've had quite a splattergun across the globe with these partnership projects. And because they're working with partner organisations, obviously they kind of just move in short-term phases. So we set up what we've called our 4 rewilding hubs. So I'll give you a quick run through of them now. So the first one is here in Scotland. It's up in Inverness, and it covers the Cromarty Firth primarily, but also the Inverness Firth. And this is focused on restoring oysters and seagrass at the moment. So this project started about 18 months ago, and we started with just doing a complete baseline. The last time seagrass was surveyed in the Firth was in the 80s, and no one's looked at it since. So you can imagine so many meadows have disappeared. There's new ones that have appeared that no one has record of. So we did a lot of drone surveying on foot to really get a feel for what the extent is. This year we've just pulled in £500,000 of grant funding to do a lot of planting of seagrass. So from our mapping, we've been able to identify what we've called donor meadows. So these are seagrass meadows that are healthy enough that we can go and take seed, take cores from, and use that to expand those meadows and also create new meadows in areas that we've identified as being suitable. So areas that had historic extent and that have got suitable kind of sediment conditions. And we also did a mycorrhizal fungi analysis on the seagrasses. And it turns out the different firths that you can see have got completely different communities of mycorrhizal fungi. So trying to factor that into how we go about doing restoration as well. For the oysters, oyster supply is a huge limiting factor to restoration at the moment. So we are working to get the permissions to set up our own kind of in-water nursery. So we'd buy small spat from the kind of commercial nurseries for the native oysters, and then we'd grow them on in situ, so already in the right conditions. And there's two different things you can do with those. You can either release some of those oysters, or you can let them reach maturity and then they'll release their own spat, which can obviously then kind of travel out through the nursery baskets and hopefully start to settle. That work is still very much in development. There's a lot to be done in terms of making sure there's actually suitable substrate for the oysters to settle onto. In the first, like, it's so much just like such soft sediment. But yeah, both oysters are a biogenic habitat. So traditionally they would grow on themselves. So how you re-kickstart that when there's no oysters for them to grow onto is currently the conundrum that we're chewing over and making our plans. So our secondary wilding hub is called Wild Mira, and it's in Portugal. So the River Mira is this one down here in the south of Portugal. And it's a catchment-based project. So we're basically looking at the rivers itself, all of their tributaries, and the riparian habitat around it, and kind of all the way down to the estuary and the salt marsh and the seagrass meadows there as well. They've got huge problems, unfortunately, with a newly discovered invasive species, which is this blue crab down here. So at the moment, we've got kind of two projects in progress. One of them is really trying to get a hold on that blue crab before it was literally recorded for the first time last year, but it's spread so quickly. So yeah, we're trying to get a handle on that and stop it from going any further. There's quite a few endemic fish species within the basin, and the blue crabs are just ravenous. They eat everything. And unfortunately, the endemic fish species are normally the first to go. And the second project kind of in the riparian galleries is around removing eucalyptus. So eucalyptus is grown as a timber crop there for, I think, paper. But it kind of overgrows the native oak forests, so the cork oaks. So often they get abandoned, which is a huge fire risk in the south of Portugal. So we're going in and cutting down the eucalyptus, finding ways to manage that, keep it down, and allowing the native oak forests to regenerate there. So then we've got another marine project. So this is wilder reefs in Indonesia. Very small map at the top. We're in the Nusa Penida Marine Protected Area, which is just east of Bali. So within that particular stretch of reef, you've got gorgeous sections of kind of healthy reef, and then you've just got these craters of nothing. And that's from a mixture of historic anchor damage and also from blast fishing. So that's where they used to throw dynamite in the water, stun the fish, all the fish float to the surface, you scoop them up, but obviously that destroys the coral underneath, because the coral there is really, like those particular pictures, you're talking like 4 meters deep. And then no reef, no fish. So we're at the moment trialing, just kind of restoring those little patches within a healthy reef to restore that connectivity. And that's something that we're then hoping to find an even more degraded area, basically. This is within a marine protected area, so it has got good protections on it. But our long-term view is to really find quite a big challenge where there's even less reef nearby. But we're still on the hunt for what that site might be. Last one, we've got our Wilder Yasuni project. So this is in Ecuador, in the Ecuadorian Amazon. So the Yasuni National Park is this green area here, and our project is just on the border of it. So the border is literally this river that you can see wiggling along the border of our land. So this side is the national park, and our parcel of land is about 250 hectares just on the other side of the border. So it's not got the protections of the national park, but obviously that's a really, really important kind of boundary area. So we bought that land to primarily protect it. It's mostly intact rainforest. You can see the area kind of that's more degraded in the middle where you've got the house. There used to be some cow pastures there and cacao plantations. But the rainforest will very quickly consume that. So we really bought that to protect it because the other buyers were, one of them was going to mine it for gold, so cut down all the trees and pan for gold, and the other was going to cut it all down for palm oil. So we had contacts in the local community there. There's a local eco lodge called Mandaripanga that one of my colleagues had been to and done lots of volunteering at over the years. So Freddie reached out and said, hey, there's this land that's come up like around where I'm living. He was like, this is the situation. Is there anything you guys can do? So we're now working very closely with the local community there to give them more opportunities to be able to work with the rainforests. So we're doing lots of work with the local children. So we've set up bird watching clubs. You can see them all pretending to be birds down there. We're setting up English classes there to allow more of them, more of the kind of older generation to become guides. They've got the most fantastic knowledge of all the species, but the way of the world is they need to be able to speak English to get the guiding jobs. But there's so many people interested in it. So we've currently got 2 interns out there that are running English classes for the local communities. We've been running cooking workshops for them to really help them kind of set up all of the different pieces they need to set up really an ecotourism that's very sustainably done and is a very special experience. From a research point of view, we're setting up what we're called sentinel trees. You can see my colleague there, he's goodness knows how many meters up in the canopy. We're really lucky to work with Ollie from Ropey Science, who's, I guess, a tree climbing specialist. So we're setting up basically monitoring trees where we're putting camera traps, bioacoustic audio moth devices and eDNA sampling that we're doing in the ground and in the canopy, because there's certain species that obviously are only on the ground, and there's also certain species that are always missed from these studies because they're only in the canopy and it's so hard to access. But we've got these incredibly clever camera trap boxes now that are basically on pulleys. So the camera goes up into a box and then you can winch it all the way down, obviously extract, replace the batteries, and then winch it up and it slots back into place. So yeah, lots of exciting stuff going on there, and another very different take on kind of rewilding with a community focus rather than active restoration. So then we've got our last little bit, which is the innovation program. So this is a bit that's very close to my heart that I've been setting up with my colleague Thiago. And over the years, we've found that we naturally gravitate and really love working with these like innovative projects. So one of our earliest ones was, you can see the diver there, he's holding what's called green gravel. So kelp restoration is really limited by how do you get kelp back into the ocean, because it's often quite deep, it's often quite high wave energy environments. So we worked with a company that was developing this new technology and this new way of seeding kelp for restoration, which they termed green gravel. So we've done a couple of different trials of that, a couple of different iterations. And yeah, I think we've, we deployed mid last year, so obviously it's still quite early to tell exactly what those results will be, but it's been a really interesting process, kind of identifying where those, I guess, pinch points are, what's limiting restoration, and working to try and restore them. Again, we've got the mycorrhizal fungi trial, which I've already talked about, kind of adding that missing component back into different elements of restoration. And then in the bottom, we've got what we call our termite trial in Benin. So this came from a research paper that was more like observational based, just identifying that the less deserted areas that have got bits of tree and shrub cropping up have always got the termite mounds. So then we started to think about, well, how, kind of what comes first? And actually, can we harness the power of termites to facilitate this return from desertification and actually facilitate regeneration. The initial results from that are really quite exciting, and it seems to be quite successful in terms of how the termites change the ground structure, vegetation structure, and how the water is stored in the soil. And so off the back of this, I set up with Thiago this innovation grant. So we've just run our first cycle. So this was specifically designed to support tests like these projects of novel restoration methods. So the application cycle has just closed. It closed on the 31st of March. So I'm currently busy reviewing all of those applications. But yeah, we've got some really exciting themes coming through, still around mycorrhizal fungi. That seems to be a very hot topic at the moment. Also around bioremediation, using things like biochar, also using saprotrophic fungi to create like mycofilters and stuff for both terrestrial and freshwater remediation. There's lots of innovation around mangroves in terms of how do you protect the seeds when you put the mangroves in, because they're in high wave energy environments. So both in terms of innovations around how you plant those seeds and also wave barriers, there's lots of different things for us to be testing. So I've got, a very tough job in terms of choosing between all those fantastic applications. But that's been really wonderful because we really are encouraging, I guess, proper like research planning there. Like we're asking about experimental design, treatments, replicates. And we weren't sure how that was going to be received. But yeah, we've been absolutely blown away by the response. So yeah, very happy to, very excited to see those projects launch. So that was a whistle-stop tour of Mossy Earth and all of the different elements that we cover and what we do. So I just wanted to use the remainder of the time just to chat through any elements that you guys are particularly interested in. So yeah, happy to take any questions on anything really. I'll do my best to answer them. But yeah, thank you very much for listening.
Can I start?
Yeah.
I wanted to ask a little bit more about how you got the job at Mossy Earth, and what your career was like in education, and how you end up. It seems like the coolest job in the world.
Yeah, I feel pretty lucky to be working there. So I studied a BSc in biology at the University of Bath. In that, I took a placement year. So I worked for the Game and Wildlife Conservation Trust as a farmland ecology researcher for a year before my final year. Unfortunately, that was when COVID struck. So I did about half of my placement and the other half was online. Actually, I did get to go back because we had accommodation on site. So because they've got the Game and Wildlife Conservation Trust has got fantastic invertebrate monitoring records that go back to the 50s. Same sites have been monitored year in, year out for however many decades that is. So it actually did class as essential work to kind of not lose that year-long records. So I was able to go back to the accommodation on site in June, so I had to go home for 3 months. And then, yeah, they controlled and allowed us to come back. So I spent that summer doing pollinator surveys. So I was looking at, I guess, all of the different agri-environment schemes and the different ways that you can, I guess, restore microhabitats around farmland in ways that are obviously beneficial for biodiversity, but also beneficial for farmers, and how that benefited the crops. So I was specifically looking at field beans and looking at how you could match margin mixes to attract the most effective pollinators to the crops. So I guess that was my first experience of what could be called habitat restoration, just kind of in micro. So that had a really big emphasis on connectivity. That's where the power of farmland really comes in. So from that, I knew I wanted to kind of build on that. So after I graduated, I moved up to Scotland with my partner's work. So I was then looking for jobs around here. There's so many fantastic restoration projects going on. But yeah, the competition was tough with not much experience. So I ended up having to take consultancy work. So I worked as a consultant ornithologist for about a year. So that was specifically on renewable energy developments. So doing all of the impact assessments for based on what birds are in the area, how many would we model would be colliding with those wind turbines, and based on that, what would be the population impact assessments for the different species in those areas. So that was really useful experience, and off the back of those projects, you can kind of write up recommendations to the landowners, but ultimately it's for compliance. So unfortunately, a lot of the time it was a thank you very much for your report, that's my box ticked. But it got me the experience and it got me the thinking and it gave me the passion to kind of really pursue the restoration that I wanted to be doing. So from that job, I landed the position with Mossy Earth as a conservation biologist. And this was at the start working primarily with the partner projects, which was actually such a lovely way in because I was able to go out with experts that we'd kind of funded. And I'd go and film bits, I'd go and help with tree planting days, I'd go and help with building beaver dam analogues, and all sorts. So that gave me a really nice breadth of experience. And from that, I've moved into Mossy Earth Science and Impact team. So across our 4 rewilding hubs, I now work on developing all of the planning processes, like the strategic assessments and adaptive management that goes in across those 4 very, very different projects of how do we try and standardize what we're doing, what we're thinking about in a way that works across them all. And as part of that, I also work on managing the innovation grant. So yeah, it's been lots of different routes in. But yeah, I'd say there's no such thing as bad experience. You can learn things from everything and extract those learnings into kind of all sorts of different scenarios if you're willing to kind of sit and really think about them. Yeah.
How will with the innovation fund, is it based on waiting for sort of papers to come out with sort of restoration methods ideas, or is it with new ideas that they've or is it kind of going to be tested
Yeah, so one of the sections on the grant application is essentially a literature review. And it's completely okay if the literature review is there is absolutely no literature, because that makes a pretty strong case that there is a very large knowledge gap there. But it's also okay if there is certain literature and it's okay, there's been one study published that's maybe on quite a small site, or it might even be a lab-based test. And it's okay, you've got this proof of principle that we're now going to scale or we're going to apply in this very specific scenario. So yeah, we're really happy for people to make the case either way. But yeah, it's just about justifying why you think there's a knowledge gap there for whatever degree there is.
And for the projects that you guys work on, are you trialing some newer restoration methods? But is there ever point where you're kind of when none of those work in that specific site, and you're kind of where you go here, they're not successful down.
Yeah, so I guess with our own projects with the rewilding hubs, they're all quite new, so they've all been set up within the last 1 to 2 years. So I feel like we're still in that trialing phase. We've not reached the point where we've exhausted our options yet. I think seagrass presents a really interesting challenge. It's so temperamental, for want of a better word, in terms of how it's restored. No one can quite find a pattern to where it thrives, to where it refuses to grow. So I think that's going to be an interesting case where we are going to try a number of different methods at scale and see if we can identify any patterns. I think when you get those instances where it's just nothing's working, you just got to take a step back and look at the big picture and see if you can identify any patterns. And at that point, you've just got to kind of follow different leads. There's no harm in trying a lot of different things as long as you use common sense. So yeah, I hope that answers your question.
Can I ask one more?
Yeah, of course.
For the seagrass project up in America, Cromarty, that's is it? I wonder how different it's going to be from the further north restoration.
Mm-hmm.
It's not so successful, and it's you have these historic seagrass beds, but sediment's changed over time. position or whatever. So it's like even if you try and restore it, like you're trying to find ways like of trials that might work, but it's like it would have been a completely different sort of situation maybe historically. So it's like
Yeah.
it depends whether you're willing to bring it back in the current state it's in.
Yeah, so I think we've got a slightly nicer starting point than the first and the fourth project. As in, I think we've got a slightly easier. So my understanding is that there's really not any existing beds down here because they're coming, like we work very closely, we chat with them, we do kind of knowledge sharing days. They come up to us, we come down here. And yeah, there's not the existing beds for them to build off down here. So we're in conversations about collecting seed from our existing beds because we do have some, not many, but some quite healthy existing beds. So I think for the chromaty first, it's that slightly easier starting point. If you, okay, we do have something here, we know it can work. But yeah, as you say, the areas that actually had the historic extent, we're looking at that sediment going, I actually think this is one of the worst areas to restore, and that's not what we're necessarily prioritizing. Because yeah, it's when you lose that seagrass, everything changes in the sediment. We did a lot of analysis last year. So we did water quality sampling, we did geotechnical sediment analysis for heavy metals, and yeah, the mycorrhizal fungi analysis, and we did all of that in existing beds and in areas where there is not seagrass, and there was no significant difference in any of it. So there's nothing theoretically in the ground conditions that we picked up in any of that analysis that suggests why seagrass would or wouldn't grow. So at this point, it's like, okay, we're going to work, I think, by starting to expand from existing meadows and see if we can get them moving out, as well as trialing, I think, one completely new site. So I guess we're kind of trying to distribute our eggs across as many baskets as possible by trying as many different approaches, just to try and mitigate, I guess, the risk of nothing growing. But yeah, we're dedicated to a presence there for the long term, so we'll keep figuring it out. But yeah, it's going to present a very interesting challenge.
Thank you. It's really nice. So I think the question I was really going to ask, you kind of answered it already, but I do have another question. It's kind of this less relevant to what you talked about, but previously. So I noticed there's quite some companies recently have been trying to genetically encourage extinct species.
The direwolf. Oh yes.
I was just wondering what your thoughts are on that kind of thing. I mean, there's so many species going extinct day to day. It seems a little bit frivolous, but it is quite cool in terms of a lot of attention. Is it something that you would ever consider trying to rewild an extinct species? Or
yeah, I'll answer for myself here. But yeah, I think you've really got to go back to kind of what I was saying at the start of thinking about what is the purpose, what function does it serve, what processes does that species kind of tie into. Generally, the focus on kind of one specific species. There's cases where it's useful, like flagship species, that's kind of useful from like a comms point of view, like your giant pandas. And sometimes, obviously, you do get your keystone species. But yeah, I think you've really got to be asking the question of what are those species going to be doing that our current species aren't already doing. I'd say it would be low down my list of potential restoration interventions, especially when you consider the cost. Like that kind of cost to impact ratio is something we're always so conscious of in terms of cost effectiveness of the interventions. If you spend however much on that, how much are you going to get out of that compared to doing, say, 3 much cheaper, but spreading that impact across so many different things? Yeah, there is obviously benefit to getting people talking about these things. But yeah, it's interesting to watch at the moment. Yeah, I hope that answers your question.
I've got a question from the chat. Someone said, what would you say to someone interested in ecology but not exactly sure what specific group to find, how to find their niche? So someone in overall general interest, but not quite sure what grounding advice for them.
Yeah, so I guess in ecology there is this real emphasis on kind of finding your niche. I felt it when I came out of university. My placement was focused on entomology. And I was like, insects are cool, but like, you know, there's more. So I kind of went up the chain and went to birds, and I was like, oh, birds are cool, but like any of these in isolation just didn't really capture me. But I'd say just trying out the different experiences, especially if you're not sure. And ultimately, I decided to very firmly stake myself as a generalist, and kind of refuse to be pushed into one taxonomic box, and kind of focus on the holistic, which I think is becoming increasingly common in restoration. But yeah, I'd say don't worry if you don't know what your niche is, but just to try as many different things, and just take the opportunities that come, and there'll always be learnings to come from them. Yeah.
Do you ever encounter like opposition or hostility to projects?
Surprisingly, we haven't really, and I think that's because we're maybe quite conscious of it from the start. So we're always quite open, and we like to think we're quite friendly. But yeah, so like for the project in Inverness, like you might expect there to be opposition from like the shellfish farmers or anything like that, but we just got straight in contact with them, and they've actually been our biggest advocate. They've been really helpful to us. They've been taking us out on the boat. Yeah, I think if you can find common ground with people, which ultimately you can with restoration, there's very few people that truly don't want to see things restored. It's about framing it in a way that's relatable to them, which is definitely a skill. But if you can kind of think from their point of view, what's going to interest them, and what's where do their interests lie, often you can find very productive and very willing allies in all sorts of groups.
Mycorrhizal stuff here, the site going to tomorrow, was that purely with fresh planting, or was there existing planting that you will also try? I just wondered, like, you get so many failed or space at half-fast planting projects that get funded for a couple of years, to bang it in, they abandon it.
Yeah.
With the mycorrhizal stuff, be able to fix that? Is that something you're looking at as part of your project, or is it purely a fresh planting?
Yeah, so for this project, it is application at the time of planting. So obviously you dig your hole, put the tree in, and put the pellet next to the roots. It is possible to retrospectively apply the fungi. That's something that's maybe more of like a secondary application, because then your cost increases again. Like tree planting is already on such tight margins. And the pellets obviously add an additional cost to that. If you then were to retrospectively apply them, you have to pay for like basically double digging the hole. So I think the absolute ideal scenario would be that this is just incorporated into general practice at the time of planting. But yeah, I do think for those areas where you are getting high mortalities of already planted trees, it would be very interesting to see basically how mature the tree can be when it kind of gains its symbionts. Because especially if you're planting into areas that don't have woodland nearby and haven't had woodland for 50 or 100 years, you're not really going to have a mycorrhizal community there. So it is very possible that applying them at a later stage could be beneficial.
Sorry, I just want to clarify. So you're going back to the site where they've already done planting and applying the mycorrhizal later on, is that right?
No, so...
Or is there more planting happening there?
So the planting was done over the last 2 weeks in the glorious sunshine, which I'm very jealous of.
I went there on a field trip, actually.
Nice. Yeah, so I'm very excited to be going. A bit gutted I missed the sunshine last week, but so the pellets were put in at the time of planting. And so I'm going tomorrow to be taking those initial, I guess, height and girth measurements for the trees, tagging each individual tree, and then we'll go back a year after, 2 years after, and then Borders Forest Trust will carry on for up to 5 years after is what they've committed to. And we will measure those individual trees and track change in height, because obviously every tree is different. You can't just do overall height. So yeah, we'll track change in height across the treated and untreated trees, and see if we can give them an edge.
And is it just the montane? Is it just the willows, or is it what trees are they?
It's just mountain birch.
Oh, it's birch. Okay,
Yeah,
cool.
so it's high altitude birch that was taken from. I think it was taken from up in the Cairngorms, because obviously there's not really any high altitude birch down in the Borders, but we're planting between 550 and 650 meters. Yeah.
Awesome. I actually had another question. It's not on jumping on out. How long are the scope of some of your projects? Are they all quite short term, or have you got any? I guess what are the?
Oh, it's very variable.
Yeah. What would be the longest term one that you're committed to then, I guess?
I think we've got commitments in at the moment up until 2028.
Okay, cool.
And that's a project. The one that particularly comes to mind is translocating ground squirrels in Slovakia. So they love the airfields of the main airport in Bratislava, which obviously the airport don't really like them. But generally speaking, the ground squirrel population in Slovakia is not doing very well. So we're working with BROS to capture them and translocate them to new suitable sites, and also to mix. There's a couple of different airfields actually. So we're then mixing the genetic diversity, because they do have a bit of a population bottleneck, but that's just yearly translocations of collecting however many individuals happen to be in the airfields. I think there are some other sites as well, but it's the airfields that kind of makes the headline of that project. So yeah, we've done I think 2 years of that already, and that's in the books until 2028. But yeah, some of them are just like 1 year or like one tree planting season, but often we do monitor. So the intervention itself might just be like one winter or whatever. But yeah, we do, generally speaking, most of our projects have at least 1 year of monitoring, if not more.
How do you build the project you're working on? And like I've checked on your website, and it seems you have like some clusters of projects, so like in like that. So you how do you pick up like that you will do some project so specific countries?
Yeah, so I guess I joined Mossy Earth maybe nearly 3 years ago. Lost track of time. So Mossy Earth was already set up and kind of had been working with some certain partners for quite a long period of time. So when you're setting up new projects, it generally goes a lot smoother and is a lot faster and a lot less intensive in terms of manpower with partners that have already been through our processes. They already know our management plans, they know our systems, they know our comms and like transparency and filming requirements. So generally the partners that we've been working with for a long time, we have done multiple projects with them, which is why you see clusters in Slovakia. That's all with the same partner, BROS, who are really lovely organization. Sometimes we get projects kind of just come into our inbox. So we've got a team inbox where people send inquiries and be like, hey, I've got this idea. Can you guys help? So we've picked up projects that way. Sometimes it's kind of word of mouth. But yeah, at this point, when we're focusing on our rewilding hubs, we're not really taking on new partnership projects at this point in time. We're continuing to work with the partners that we're already working with, because that's just, I guess, less intensive for us to manage. When we've got 60 different projects going on, that makes a big difference. So yeah, that's kind of how it's been historically. But yeah, it's really on the merits of the individual projects. But because we've never put out an open call, we probably haven't reached people that do have fantastic projects, but such is the nature of these things. Any other questions?
With your UCD project, seems like you're training them up to speak English to be tour guides and stuff. Is there a backup to that? So for employment, I'm just thinking, if you get hit by another COVID, when I mean, it's predominantly international tourists you
Yes.
go into. if there's no international market and current state of economics, potential funding dropping off cliffs, is there anything that you can kind of leave them with going, we don't have this, but we've also got this in employment? So I'm thinking there's some places where I would like to guess what the poaching level went up because of COVID, because the economy's crashed in certain countries.
Yeah, so we're looking at sustainable agroforestry and recognizing that, these people aren't maliciously destroying areas of rainforest. They need to make a living. We're still working with them. There's a lot for us to learn. It's not something that as conservation biologists we necessarily have a lot of experience in with agroforestry, but there are other organizations doing that within Ecuador.
Yes, Kenya or something called. They're in the Andes. Outside of Quito. And they've got coffee growing scattered throughout the forest kind of thing.
It's definitely.
They definitely sell spectacled bears coming down and stuff.
Yeah, nice.
The rainforest obviously very different climate.
Yeah. We're currently working with them to work out what would work for a longer term. But the agroforestry models is normally like a 5-year kind of stopgap before you're getting that reliable crop. We're thinking about it, but we've got to keep our fingers crossed that we've got 5 years to get those up and running. Any other questions?
I think that's the hour anyway, so
Perfect.
thank you very much for giving us that presentation. Thanks for answering the questions. It's been great. Really.
Yeah, no, it's been a pleasure. Thank you all for your questions and for being kind of so interested in what we're doing.